Don't you want to try the coffee I made especially for you, honey? Idris asked with an odd smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Lami was sitting at her sister-in-law Zara's elegant dining table in her Lagos home, where they gathered for their monthly family brunch. The coffee cup in front of her had a strange, almost metallic smell that made her stomach turn. At 26, she never imagined she'd be questioning whether her own husband was trying to poison her. But after 3 years of marriage and countless incidents of accidental food poisoning, she had learned to be cautious, especially around Zara. She had a way of orchestrating situations that left Lami sick or humiliated, always with that same innocent smile Idris was wearing now. The room was filled with the gentle clinking of cutlery and the faint hum of jazz music playing softly from the kitchen speaker. Sunlight streamed through the large windows, casting long shadows across the polished mahogany table. "How thoughtful of you," she replied, forcing a smile while her mind raced. The aroma wafting from the cup was unlike any coffee she had smelled before. It reminded her of the time last month when she had ended up in urgent care after drinking tea at Zara's house. The doctors couldn't explain her symptoms, and Zara had insisted she made the tea exactly the same way she made her own. Zara watched her intently from across the table, absently stirring her own untouched coffee. "Idris has become quite the barista lately," she said with a smirk. "He's been practicing different brewing methods just for you." The way she emphasized "for you" sent chills down Lami's spine. She had noticed Idris spending more time at Zara's house lately, claiming they were planning a surprise for their upcoming anniversary. But something felt off. The whispered conversations that stopped when she entered the room, the strange texts she glimpsed on his phone, and now this coffee with its peculiar scent. Lami lifted the cup, pretending to take a sip while studying their expressions. Idris and Zara exchanged a quick glance that confirmed her suspicions. Making a show of checking her phone, she stood up abruptly. "Oh, would you look at that? I need to make a quick call for work." "Zara, would you mind if I use your study?" As she walked past Zara's place setting, she deliberately stumbled, quickly switching their coffee cups in the confusion of steadying herself. "I'm so sorry," she exclaimed, straightening up. "I'm such a klutz sometimes." Zara waved off the apology with a tight smile. "Just try not to break anything in the study." Lami nodded and hurried away, her heart pounding. Through the study's doorway, she could still see them at the table. Now she just had to wait and watch. From the study doorway, she watched Zara lift the coffee cup to her lips, and her stomach clenched with anxiety. Part of her wanted to stop her, to warn her, but she needed to know the truth. She had spent too many nights in emergency rooms, too many hours doubled over in pain, always after sharing meals with them. It wasn't always like this. When she first met Idris at a friend's wedding in Lagos 3 years ago, he was charming and attentive. Zara had seemed welcoming too, inviting her to family gatherings and offering to help plan the wedding. But looking back, she should have noticed the red flags. The way Zara would accidentally spill things on her dress at important events, or how her food always seemed to have extra seasoning when Zara helped cook. The incident started small, an upset stomach here, a mild allergic reaction there. Idris always had an excuse ready. Maybe it was something you ate earlier, or you must be coming down with something. But the pattern was becoming clear. The worst was 2 months ago when she ended up hospitalized after eating breakfast at their house. The doctors found traces of something in her system they couldn't identify, but Idris convinced everyone she must have taken some expired medication. Lami gripped the doorframe, watching as Zara took another sip of the coffee. Idris was typing on his phone, seemingly unconcerned. Her own untouched cup sat cold on the table where she had left it, the metallic smell still lingering in her nose, making her shudder. A slight tremor in Zara's hand caught her attention. She set down the cup, her face suddenly pale. "Idris," she said, her voice shaking. "Something's wrong." Idris looked up, his expression changing from confusion to horror as he realized which cup she was drinking from. He jumped up, knocking over his chair. "Zara!" Zara's hands were trembling violently now. I feel. She tried to stand but stumbled, grabbing the edge of the table for support. "Idris, what did you put in that coffee?" Lami stepped out of the study, her phone already recording. Idris was beside Zara now, his face ashen. "That wasn't supposed to be your cup," he whispered. But in the silence of the dining room, his words carried clearly. Zara's eyes widened with realization and fear. "Call an ambulance," she gasped, sliding to the floor. "Please." "I can't." Lami dialed 911 immediately, her hands steady despite the chaos unfolding before her. "Emergency services?" "Yes, we need an ambulance at 1542 Maple Grove Drive," she said clearly, keeping her phone recording with her other hand. "My sister-in-law appears to be having a severe reaction to something in her coffee. She's conscious, but experiencing tremors." As she spoke to the dispatcher, Zara's eyes locked onto hers. The usual cold calculation in her gaze was replaced by raw fear. "Lami, you switched. You knew." "Ma'am, the ambulance is on its way," the dispatcher assured. "Please stay on the line." Idris was growing more frantic by the second. "Zara, what's happening? That wasn't supposed to. I mean, it wasn't meant for." "Shut up, Idris." Zara snapped through gritted teeth, her anger momentarily overcoming her distress. "This is all your fault. You said it would just make her sick enough to miss the board meeting next week. You promised it wouldn't be traced." Lami's blood ran cold. The board meeting, where she was scheduled to present her proposal for a major client account. The same account Zara had been trying to land for months at their competing firms. Everything started clicking into place. The grandfather clock in the corner chimed 11, its steady rhythm contrasting with the panic in the room. "The tea last month," she said, her voice surprisingly steady, "and the breakfast incident 2 months ago, those weren't accidents, were they?" Zara's face contorted with another wave of pain. "That tea, that was supposed to keep you home during the Johnson contract presentation," she admitted, her voice strained. "But you went anyway." She clutched her stomach, doubling over. He said, "We just needed to discredit you, make clients think you were unreliable." The sound of sirens filled the air outside. Idris stood up, backing away from both of them, his hand brushing against the edge of the table, knocking over an empty coffee cup. "Zara, stop talking," he said, panic creeping into his voice. "You don't know what you're saying." "I know exactly what I'm saying," she spat, her words slurring slightly. "We've been planning this for months, ever since Lami started outperforming me at every client meeting. You were supposed to make sure she drank it today." The paramedics burst through the front door, and Lami quickly stepped aside to let them work. As they loaded Zara onto a stretcher, she stopped recording and sent the video to her private email, then to her lawyer, her fingers trembling slightly as she typed. Idris stood frozen, watching as his carefully constructed plan crumbled around him. "I'll ride with her to the hospital," Lami told the paramedics, her voice firm. "After all, I need to make sure my sister-in-law gets the proper treatment." She met Idris's terrified gaze. "And I'm sure the doctors will be very interested in knowing exactly what was in that coffee." The emergency room at Lagos General Hospital was a flurry of activity as doctors rushed to treat Zara. Lami sat in the waiting room, her phone clutched in her hand, replaying the recording of Zara's confession. The tremors in her voice, the panic in her eyes, it was all the evidence she needed to prove this wasn't just paranoia. "Family of Zara Anderson," a nurse called out. She stood up, noting Idris's conspicuous absence. He'd mumbled something about parking the car 20 minutes ago and hadn't returned. "I'm her sister-in-law," she said, following the nurse through the double doors. "How is she?" "She's stabilized, but we found concerning levels of toxins in her system." The nurse's expression was grave. "The doctor would like to speak with you about some unusual findings in her blood work." Dr. Phillips, a tall woman with graying hair and sharp eyes, was waiting by Zara's room. "Mrs. Bennett," she said, "could you tell me exactly what happened before your sister-in-law became ill?" Lami took a deep breath, pulling out her phone. "I think you should listen to this first." She played the recording from brunch, watching the doctor's expression change from professional concern to alarm. "This is very serious," Dr. Phillips said, making notes on her tablet. "The substance we found isn't something that accidentally ends up in coffee. We're looking at deliberate contamination." Just then, Idris appeared at the end of the hallway, his face pale and sweaty. He had clearly overheard the doctor's words, his shirt slightly rumpled, as if he'd been pacing outside. "Lami," he started, taking a step toward her. "Let me explain." "Stay back," Dr. Phillips warned, pressing the nurse's call button. "Security to room 412, please." Idris raised his hands in surrender, his breathing shallow. "This is all a misunderstanding." Zara was confused. She didn't know what she was saying. "Really?" Lami pulled up the texts she discovered on his phone last week, the ones she had secretly forwarded to herself. "So these messages between you and Zara, about making sure I was out of commission before the Henderson presentation, were those just friendly conversation?" His face drained of color. "You went through my phone?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. "After I found the strange powder in your desk drawer?" "Yes, I did." She turned to Dr. Phillips. "Doctor, I've been hospitalized 3 times in the past 6 months with unexplained symptoms. I'd like to know if they match what you found in Zara's system today." The doctor's eyes narrowed, her grip tightening around the tablet. "We'll need to run some tests to compare. Security will make sure your husband remains available for questioning." 2 security guards appeared, positioning themselves on either side of Idris. He looked trapped, his carefully constructed facade crumbling. "Zara and I," he stammered, "we were just trying to help you, slow you down. You are working too hard, taking all the big clients. Zara said if we could just make you take some time off by poisoning me." Lami's voice was steady, even as her hands shook with rage. "How long have you been doing this? Was it you who tampered with my food at the Christmas party too?" Idris's silence was all the answer she needed. Behind him, she could see Zara's room, where she lay connected to various monitors. Her earlier bravado was gone, replaced by the fear of someone who knew their schemes had finally caught up with them. Detective Smith is on her way, Dr. Phillips said quietly. She'll want to take statements from everyone involved. Lami nodded, feeling a strange sense of calm. The truth was finally coming out, and there was no going back. Detective Smith arrived within the hour, her presence commanding attention in the sterile hospital corridor. She was a seasoned investigator who specialized in domestic abuse cases, and she listened intently as Lami played the recording from brunch and showed her the text messages. Mrs. Bennett, she said, reviewing her notes, you mentioned previous hospitalizations. Can you tell me more about those incidents? Lami pulled out her phone again, opening a document she had been quietly maintaining for months. The first time was in February, after a dinner at Zara's house. I had severe stomach pains and dizziness. The second was in April, the tea incident. And then in June, after breakfast with them, her voice remained steady as she continued, her eyes flickering to the security guard, now stationed near the nurse's station. Each time, the symptoms were similar, but just different enough that the doctors couldn't pinpoint a cause. The detective's eyes narrowed as she looked at the detailed log of dates, symptoms, and circumstances. You've been keeping records ever since you noticed the pattern. Lami hesitated before pulling out another phone from her purse, an older model she'd kept hidden away for emergencies. I also started carrying a backup phone with a different number. I used it to record conversations when I was around them. I have several where Zara and Idris discussed their plans, though they were careful not to be explicit. In one of the recordings, Zara's voice came through clearly, the faint clinking of cutlery in the background suggesting they were at their favorite brunch spot. The Henderson account is worth millions. Idris, we can't let her ruin everything we've worked for. Just stick to the plan. A few days of illness should be enough. Idris's response was equally damning. His tone hushed as though he was glancing around to ensure no one was listening. I've got something stronger this time. She won't make it to the presentation. Detective Smith's expression hardened as she listened. Through the window of Zara's room, Lami could see her sister. In-law was now awake, looking significantly less confident than she had at brunch. The hospital is running toxicology screens, the detective informed her. Dr. Phillips has already identified several substances that don't occur naturally. We'll need samples from your home as well. A commotion down the hall caught their attention. Idris was arguing with the security guards, his voice rising in desperation. I need to speak with my wife, he shouted. Lami, please. You don't understand. We were trying to protect you. Detective Smith stepped between them. Mr. Bennett, you're not helping your case. We've already found evidence of premeditation. Premeditation? Idris laughed, a hollow, desperate sound that echoed through the corridor. We were just trying to slow her down. She was working herself to death, taking all the major accounts. Zara said if we could just make her take some time off by poisoning her. The detective's voice was sharp. That's not protection, Mr. Bennett. That's attempted murder. That's attempted murder. The color drained from Idris's face. Murder? No, that's not. We never meant to. Then what exactly did you mean to do? Lami asked, her voice surprisingly calm. When you put something in my coffee this morning, what was supposed to happen? Idris's silence spoke volumes. Behind him, Zara was watching through her hospital room window, her face a mask of fear and calculation. Lami wondered if she was trying to figure out how to spin this, how to explain away months of systematic poisoning as some sort of misguided attempt at helping. "We'll need both of their phones," Detective Smith told the security guards, "and I want officers posted at both doors. Nobody leaves until we get the toxicology results." Dr. Phillips entered Zara's room with a tablet in hand, her expression grim as she reviewed the test results. Detective Smith and Lami followed while Idris remained outside with the guard. Zara tried to sit up straighter in her hospital bed, but the tremors hadn't completely subsided. The toxicology report shows elevated levels of several substances. "Doctor," Phillips announced, her voice clinical. "Most concerning is the presence of a particular compound that's typically used in pharmaceutical testing. It's not something the general public should have access to." Zara's face paled. "That's impossible." Idris said it was just something to cause mild symptoms. She added quickly, her voice shaking. "Mild symptoms?" Detective Smith interrupted, taking out her notebook. "Like the ones your sister-in-law experienced over the past 6 months." The door opened, and another detective entered, holding an evidence bag. "We found these in Mr. Bennett's office desk at the Anderson marketing firm," he reported, presenting several small bottles with clinical labels along with detailed notes about dosages and reactions. Lami felt her knees weaken as she realized the full scope of their plan. "You were documenting everything." "Like some kind of experiment." "It wasn't like that," Zara protested, but her voice wavered. "We just needed to track what worked. The first few attempts weren't effective enough. You kept showing up to meetings anyway, so you increased the dosages," Detective Smith concluded, examining the bottles. "Did you know these substances could be lethal in higher concentrations?" The room fell silent. Through the window, Idris sat in a chair in the hallway, his head in his hands. "The Henderson account," Lami said slowly, the pieces clicking into place. "It wasn't just about that presentation, was it? You needed me out of the way permanently because the client specifically requested me as their lead." Zara's face contorted with a mixture of anger and fear. "You were ruining everything I built. That client portfolio took years, and then you show up, and suddenly everyone wants to work with you instead." Idris's voice was cold, almost mechanical. "I said I could fix it. By killing me." The words hung in the air, heavy with accusation. "We weren't trying to," Zara started, but Dr. Phillips cut her off. "The concentration in the coffee you drank today," the doctor stated, looking directly at Zara, "was significantly higher than previous samples we've analyzed from Mrs. Bennett's earlier hospital visits. If she had consumed it all, the outcome would have been severe, possibly fatal." Detective Smith turned to the other officer. "We'll need a full warrant for both their homes and offices, and contact the pharmaceutical company listed on these bottles. Find out how they obtained these substances." Zara slumped back against her pillows, the fight draining from her face. "It wasn't supposed to go this far," she whispered. "Idris kept saying we just needed one more try." Lami stepped closer to the bed, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "Every time I got sick, every meeting I missed, every client I lost, you were both there, watching, taking notes on how your poison was affecting me." Her voice sharpened, cutting through the sterile air. "What kind of people does that make you?" The silence that followed was deafening. Outside, Idris could be heard being read his rights as additional officers arrived. Zara stared at her hands, unable to meet Lami's gaze. "Detective," Lami said, turning away from her sister. Lami said, turning away from her sister-in-law. "I'm ready to make my formal statement now." The trial lasted 3 weeks, but it felt like years. Lami sat in the courtroom each day, watching as the prosecution methodically laid out the case against Idris and Zara. The evidence was overwhelming. The bottles from Idris's office, their detailed notes on each poisoning attempt, the recorded conversations and text messages discussing their plans. What struck her most was their demeanor throughout the proceedings. Zara, usually so polished and confident, looked small in her defendant's chair. Idris couldn't even look at her, keeping his eyes fixed on the floor as expert witnesses detailed the potentially lethal effects of the substances they had used. Dr. Phillips's testimony was particularly damning. She presented a comprehensive analysis showing how they had gradually increased the dosages over time, demonstrating a clear intent to cause serious harm. A representative from the pharmaceutical company confirmed that Idris had stolen the compounds through a college friend who worked in their research department. The defendants showed a calculated pattern of behavior, the prosecutor argued in her closing statement. This wasn't just corporate sabotage, it was a systematic attempt to harm Mrs. Bennett, with a clear escalation that could have resulted in death. When the verdict was finally read, Lami felt no joy, only relief. Both Idris and Zara were found guilty on multiple counts, including attempted murder and conspiracy. The judge's words echoed through the silent courtroom. The premeditated nature of these actions, carried out against a family member over an extended period, demands the maximum sentence. Lami watched as they were led away in handcuffs, thinking about how greed and jealousy had twisted two people she once trusted into something unrecognizable. Their business, their reputations, their freedom, all sacrificed in an attempt to destroy her. 1 year after the trial, Lami stood at the podium of the Lagos Business Leaders Conference, preparing to give the keynote speech. The irony wasn't lost on her. This was exactly the kind of opportunity Zara had tried to prevent her from achieving. The Henderson account, which Zara and Idris had been so desperate to steal, had led to several more major clients, establishing Lami as one of the top marketing executives in the region. "Success isn't just about talent or hard work," she began, looking out at the sea of faces. "It's about integrity, about building genuine relationships based on trust." She paused, letting her words sink in. Sometimes the biggest threats to our success come from those closest to us, but surviving those challenges makes us stronger. After her speech, several young professionals approached her, seeking advice. One woman, her eyes bright with determination, asked how she had maintained her composure throughout the ordeal. "I focused on what I could control," Lami told her. "I gathered evidence, trusted my instincts, and refused to let fear stop me from pursuing my goals." Later that evening, she received an email from the Henderson client, confirming they were renewing their contract for another 3 years. She smiled, thinking about how differently things might have turned out if she hadn't trusted her instincts that day at brunch. The local paper had run a small article that morning about Zara and Idris beginning their prison sentences. She didn't read it. Instead, she focused on the proposal for her newest client project, knowing that the best revenge wasn't about getting even. It was about moving forward and succeeding despite those who had tried to hold her back. This story serves as a powerful reminder that betrayal can come from the people we trust the most. It highlights the importance of staying vigilant, listening to your instincts, and protecting yourself when something feels off. Always document suspicious behavior and never ignore the warning signs of manipulation. Thank you for watching my channel. If you found this lesson valuable, don't forget to check out more intriguing and eye-opening videos here. Stay safe, stay aware, and see you in the next video. This was the first time she was stepping out of her heart in years, and the villagers all looked at her in shock as they never believed that Adan was still alive. Once upon a time, there lived a very beautiful girl named Adan. Adan was born a normal girl, but as time went by, she grew older and noticed that she was now growing long beards. This made Adan so insecure about herself, as people in the village laughed at her, calling her a boy girl. Whenever Adan walked past them, they would throw funny remarks at her, saying that she was gradually transforming into a boy. The girls in the village refused to be friends with her, as they were too ashamed to be friends with her, as they were too ashamed to be associated with a girl who grew beards. This made Adan so sad, as she made up her mind never to leave her heart for any reason. Her mother did all she could to encourage her to overlook what the villagers were saying about her. But Adan could not shut her ears to the horrible names that the people called her. She thought to herself that her best bet was to excommunicate herself completely from the villagers, as she made her heart her safe haven. This was not an easy decision for Adan, who wished her life was not so complicated. She attempted to take her life on several occasions, but was dissuaded by a still voice in her head, which kept assuring her that everything would be all right. For years, no one heard or saw Adan, and the villagers began to peddle rumors that Adan was dead. But no one knew for sure, especially when Adan never showed up at her own mother's funeral. One day, some villagers were talking about Adan when a young man, who recently moved into the village, heard all they said and approached them. He asked them where Adan lived, and they directed him to her heart, which was a short distance from where they stood. The young man was so curious and decided to visit Adan's heart. He knocked on the door, but no one opened the door for him. The young man kept knocking for hours and decided to enter the heart to see if anyone was around. To his greatest surprise, he saw Adan sitting at the corner of her room, looking so sad. The young man approached Adan and introduced himself to her as Ayo. He asked her why she decided to lock herself up in her heart, and Adan explained to him that she hated her beards and wished it would all go away. Ayo listened intently as Adan poured out her heart. He could sense the pain and loneliness that had consumed her for years. Adan went on to explain how the taunts and ridicule from the villagers had taken a toll on herself, esteem leading her to withdraw completely from the world. It was then that Ayo told her that he had been looking for her for months. He was from a faraway village and had traveled from one village to the other in search of Adan. Adan opened her mouth in shock, as she could not understand why Ayo had been looking for her. Curious to know, Adan asked why he had been looking for her for months, and Ayo told her to journey with him to his village. As there lay her answer. Adan, although skeptical, agreed to follow Ayo to his village. This was the first time she was stepping out of her heart in years, and the villagers all looked at her in shock, as they never believed that Adan was still alive. They laughed at her as she passed, calling her horrible names, but Ayo encouraged her not to listen to them, as true beauty went beyond physical appearances. Adan was so excited to finally leave her village, as all she ever felt there was resentment for her own people, who hated her because she was different. They journeyed for hours and arrived at a very small village. Ayo welcomed Adan to his village, and Adan realized that the people of this village were extremely friendly. Right from the village gate, Adan was welcomed with smiles and compliments from random villagers who seemed not to care that she had beards. This was shocking to Adan, who had never felt this appreciated in her entire life. She walked with Ayo for some minutes and arrived at the king's palace. To her greatest surprise, she saw a little girl who looked so sickly, lying by the palace gate. Filled with compassion, Adan approached the sick girl, and to her surprise, the girl was healed instantly. Adan could not believe what happened and looked at Ayo in shock. They walked into the palace, and Adan met a girl who looked exactly like her. She had a beard too, like Adan, and Ayo introduced Adan to the girl as Princess Ola. Confused as to what was happening, Adan asked how this was possible, and Ayo revealed to her that she, Adan, was the long-lost daughter of his father, the king. Adan opened her mouth in shock, as she never knew that she had a twin sister and that Ayo was her brother. Adan was still trying to wrap her head around what was happening when the king emerged from his inner chamber and approached her, welcoming her back home. Adan had never been this confused in her life. She asked how this was possible, and the king narrated to her how he fell in love with Adan's mother many years ago. He wanted to marry her, but his family kicked against it because he was of royal blood, and Adan's mother was seen as a commoner. The royal family mandated him to marry the daughter of the king of the neighboring village because she was of royal blood, and he consented because they threatened to take the throne away from him if he went against their wishes. What they did not know was that Adan's mother was already pregnant with twins. In their kingdom, twins were seen as a taboo and thrown into the evil forest. So, when Adan's mother realized that she had given birth to twins, she pleaded with the midwife to keep it a secret and handed one of the twins over to the midwife, pleading with her to take the baby to the king. While she ran away with the other twin, she told the midwife to promise her never to reveal that the baby was a twin, and the midwife did as she was instructed and took one of the babies, Ola, to the king, revealing that the baby was the king's daughter. Adan's mother, on the other hand, absconded from the village with the second twin and settled in a faraway village where no one knew her. However, after a few years, the king noticed that his daughter had begun to grow beards. He wondered how this was possible, as no woman in the village ever had beards. He sought solutions, but nothing seemed to work. One day, the king invited a seer to the palace, who revealed that the king's daughter was a twin. The seer went on to reveal that the twins would continue to grow beards until they were reunited, as their separation was the reason why they both began to grow beards. The seer revealed that the twins had great powers, which was evident in the beards growing underneath their chin, and that as long as the twins remained apart, the beards would continue to grow. The seer then went on to tell the king that twins were not a curse, as everyone had thought, but that they were so powerful and capable of bringing fortune to a land. The king opened his mouth in shock, as he never knew that his daughter was a twin. They began their search for the missing twin and moved from village to village, but no one saw or heard anything about the missing twin until Ayo bumped into the villagers, who were talking about the strange girl with beards. Adan could not believe that she was a princess who had a twin sister that looked exactly like her. She was so overjoyed to finally be around people who understood her genuinely. As Adan reunited with her twin sister, the beards miraculously disappeared, and Adan and her twin were so overjoyed. With their combined powers, their village flourished in a way that it had never done before. The twins never spent a minute apart as they caught up on lost time. One afternoon, the king received some visitors who revealed to him that they had come to take Adan away, as she belonged to their kingdom and not his. They explained that the king's son came into their village to take Adan away, and that they had come to take her back. The king, confused as to why the people needed her back, considering how terribly they had treated her over the years, asked their reason for wanting her back. They revealed that since Adan left their village, the people had been suffering and toiling. A very powerful man revealed to them that all he needed to restore their wealth were some freshly cut strands from Adan's beards. The powerful man warned that he needed Adan present to cut the beard himself to perform the restoration ritual, and that the people should ensure that they return with Adan, or else their wealth would never be restored. The powerful man revealed that, over the years, their village only prospered because of Adan's presence, and the moment Adan left their village, all the luck that they had enjoyed for all these years was taken away. When the king heard this, he sent his guards to call his daughter, Adan, and when Adan arrived, the people screamed in pain and disappointment as they noticed that Adan's beards were gone. They returned to their village, sad and unsure of how to combat the pain and suffering that they were encountering. Everyone in the village began to regret how badly they treated Adan, not knowing that she was the source of their wealth and prosperity for all these years. As the people deliberated on what next to do, they heard loud screams of joy. Adan had returned to their village, promising to restore their wealth permanently, and the people were so overjoyed. As seasons passed, the village began to flourish in ways that they had never imagined. Adan, who was once rejected and insulted by the villagers, became their only beacon of hope. The people regretted all they did to her as they tendered their heartfelt apology to her, promising never to discriminate against anyone ever again. The story of Adan teaches us the immense power of our words and actions. It reminds us that words can either uplift someone, filling them with hope and strength, or deeply wound them, leaving scars that last a lifetime. Adan's journey shows that even those who are rejected and ridiculed can possess unique qualities that benefit the entire community. It's crucial to treat others with kindness and understanding, as we often fail to realize the true value of someone until they are no longer in our lives. So, let us all strive to speak kind words, support one another, and embrace differences. Life is unpredictable, and a little kindness can go a long way in making it better for everyone. Thank you for watching this story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment to let us know your thoughts. Be sure to check out more exciting and meaningful stories on our channel. Stay tuned, and we'll see you in the next video. The camera went into labor. There was a heavy rain and so much thunder and lightning. The thunder and lightning were so intense that everyone became scared, but Kesia knew that everything was going to be okay. She remembered the dream vividly, the old woman's comforting words echoing in her mind. Your prayers have been heard. You will soon be a mother the woman had said. This memory gave Kesia strength as she braced herself for what was to come. Once upon a time in the village of Omokiri, there was a woman named Kesia. She was a kind and gentle woman, but she was also a very